All right, let's jump into a deep dive that's really, for those of you who love military history, we're heading back to ancient Greece for this to the Peloponnesian War. Yeah, a war that I think most of our listeners know. Right. Really reshaped the ancient world. Yeah. But we can kind of look at it and unpack it. Okay. To see why it still matters today. Especially for anyone, who is fascinated by military strategy. Okay. Or, just how these conflicts can really have ripple effects across history. Sure. Yeah. It's amazing, after all these years, thousands of years, what we can still learn from this. Yeah, and a lot of what we know, we owe to this guy Thucydides. Oh, absolutely was an Athenian general, but he was also a historian. Yeah. And he lived through this whole war. Yeah. And he wrote what is considered the first real historical account of war, at least in the West. Right? It's called The History of the Peloponnesian War. Yeah. And what's so great about it is it's not just dates and battles. He gets into the strategy. He gets into the politics, the personalities. It really is a masterclass in military history. I think that's what makes this deep dive so exciting. Yeah. We're not, just going to rehash the basics. We want to really get into some of those insights that are still relevant today. Absolutely. So to kind of set the stage, I think we need to talk about the main players here. Okay. We've got Athens and Sparta. Yep. So you've got the Delian League, led by Athens, and they were known for their naval power. Right. But also, their democratic ideals. Yes. But you've got the Peloponnesian League, and this was headed up by Sparta. Right. Now, these guys were a land-based powerhouse. Yes. And their reputation for military discipline is really legendary even today. Yes. These two, they've been rivals for years. Yeah. So what was it that was the tipping point? Well, the immediate cause was really a relatively small event. Thebes, a Spartan ally, attacked Plataea, an ally of Athens. This happened in 431 BCE, and that was like the match in the dry kindling. So it was just that tension was already there. Exactly. Just waiting for something. Yeah. And that's where Pericles enters the scene, right? Right. He was the leader of Athens at the time. Yes. But he wasn't just a politician, he was also a brilliant strategist. Now, Pericles knew that Athens couldn't match Sparta's strength on land. No! The Spartans, they were famous for their hoplites. Yes. Those heavily armed infantrymen. Yes. That, trained for war since they were kids. Yeah, they were bred for war. Yeah. So going head-to-head with them in a land battle. Oh, that would have been suicide for Athens. Yes. So how did Pericles plan to counter that? Well, his strategy was basically to avoid fighting the Spartans on land. Okay. He wanted to use Athens' superior navy to blockade Spartan ports, cut off their trade, and basically starve them out. To protect the people of Athens, he had them all move inside the city walls. And these walls were connected to the port of Piraeus by these massive long walls. So he essentially turns Athens into an island. Yeah, a fortified island that was supplied by sea. Yeah, that was his idea. That sounds like a pretty solid strategy, at least on paper. On paper it does, but I'm guessing there were maybe some unforeseen consequences. There were some big ones, especially with all those people crammed inside the city walls. Yeah, cramming all those people in close quarters, not great sanitation. Yeah. They were basically creating the perfect breeding ground for disease. Yeah. And in 430 BCE, disaster struck. The plague. The plague? Yeah. Yeah, it swept through Athens, and it killed about a quarter of the population. Wow. Including Pericles himself. Oh, wow. Yeah. It's a stark reminder that even the best military plans can have unintended consequences. Yeah, absolutely. And it really makes you think about logistics. In public health. Yeah, even in ancient warfare. Yeah. Disease could be just as deadly as any army. Oh, yeah, for sure. And this brings us to another really fascinating figure, who kind of emerges at this time, and that is Hippocrates, the father of medicine. Yeah. He was actually a contemporary of Thucydides. And so while Thucydides was out there documenting the war, Hippocrates was observing the plague. Yeah, and this wasn't just observation, was it? I mean, he really revolutionized the way we thought about disease. Right. He rejected the idea that illness was caused by the gods or supernatural forces. Instead, he focused on environmental factors, lifestyle, diet. Yeah. He was looking for rational explanations, and this really laid the foundation for what we now call scientific medicine. That's amazing. Yeah, so even in the midst of all this horror of war and plague, right, you have this glimmer of intellectual progress. Exactly. And that's part of what makes this period so interesting. The Peloponnesian War was so much more than just battles and sieges. It was this time of upheaval and change. Yeah. Where new ideas were emerging, new ways of thinking alongside all this destruction. Yeah. And what's really fascinating is how all of these threads that seem separate the war, the politics, and these new scientific ideas, right, they're actually all intertwined. So, for example, there's this story about Hippocrates observing blacksmiths. Blacksmiths? Yeah, during the plague. Okay, what's the connection? Well, he noticed that blacksmiths seemed to be less susceptible to the plague. Okay. And he theorized that their exposure to fire might somehow be protective. Interesting. Now, we don't know if there's any scientific basis for that. Yeah. But what's important is his approach. Yeah. He's looking for patterns, cause and effect. He's trying to understand and maybe even combat this disease. Yeah, that's incredible. So as this war is raging around them, we see the seeds of scientific inquiry. Right. Taking root. Challenging traditional beliefs, seeking those rational explanations for the world around. Exactly. That's remarkable. It really is. And it kind of sets the stage for how this war is going to continue to shape not just the ancient world, but also the evolution of Western thought. Yeah. But Pericles is gone. Right. Athens needed a new leader. And the person who steps into this role is going to take the city in a very different direction. That'll be Cleon. Right? Oh. I mean, he was known for being much more aggressive than Pericles. Yeah. Cleon was a big believer in Athenian democracy. But he also believed in a very assertive foreign policy. Okay. He wanted to really push the war, crush Sparta decisively. Okay. And how did that go for him? Did this change in leadership affect the course of the war? It did, but not necessarily the way Cleon hopes. Oh, yeah. He had some early successes, but his aggressive stance also led to some pretty costly defeats. And he was actually killed in the Battle of Amphipolis in 422 BC. Oh, wow. Yeah. And his death opened the door for peace negotiations. Okay, and that's when we get the Peace of Naissus. Exactly. With Cleon gone, a more moderate leader named Naissus takes over. Okay. He was really important in negotiating this peace treaty. Yeah. Signed in 421 BCE. Okay. It was supposed to last for 50 years. 50 years. I mean, that really makes you wonder if they actually thought it was going to hold. Yeah. Right? Or if it was just a time to catch their breath. Yeah, a pause. Yeah. Yeah, before they started fighting again. Yeah. I mean, on the surface, they both seemed exhausted by the war. Yeah. But this peace treaty is fragile right from the start. And why was that? Was it just a matter of time? Well, that's what we have to look at. We have to look beyond the treaty itself. We dig into the motivations, the ambitions of both sides. Yeah. I mean, was a lasting peace even possible? Right. I mean, they had such different worldviews. Right. These two. And they were both constantly struggling for power and influence. Exactly. Yeah. No, I think you're right. It's not enough to know that it fails. We really have to understand why. Right. And I think by understanding why this peace failed, it's really going to give us some valuable insights into the nature of conflict itself. Right. And insights that I think are still relevant today. Absolutely. But before we get into that, I think we should talk about another key player that kind of enters the scene around this time. Okay. Someone that I think is going to add even more drama and complexity to this story. Okay. Alcibiades. Alcibiades. Yeah. One of the most fascinating, and controversial, for sure, figures in Athenian history. Yes. Brilliant, ambitious, charming, and utterly ruthless. Yeah, he really embodies both the best and worst of the Athenian ambition. Yes, he does. And his story is about to take a turn that will have massive consequences for everyone. Absolute. For the war, for Athens, and for himself. Yes. But we'll have to save that, right, for the next part of our deep dive. So stay with us, right. Okay, so where we left off was with the Peace of Naissus, right? Hey, it's supposed to last for 50 years. Yeah. But it's already kind of showing cracks. Right. And then you've got Alcibiades, this ambitious Athenian aristocrat just waiting in the wings. So what role did he play in all this? Well, he was definitely a catalyst for more conflict, okay? But in a way that I think even seasoned military minds probably wouldn't predict. Okay, Alcibiades had this idea for a bold, some might say reckless, move, okay? The Sicilian expedition, right? And this is where understanding the strategic map of the time is really crucial. Sicily was a major grain producer, right? Alcibiades argued that controlling Sicily would give Athens a huge advantage, right? Not just in terms of food, right? But also potentially cutting off Spartan trade routes. So it sounds like on the surface, it's all about resources and logistics, right? But knowing Alcibiades, yeah, I'm guessing there was more to it than that. Oh yeah, there's always more to it with Anpoca. Control of Sicily would mean projecting Athenian power even further across the Mediterranean, right? It was a way to outflank Sparta, to basically become the undisputed dominant force in the region, right? Now this appealed to Athenian ambition, sure, but it was a massive gamble. It's like that old saying, fortune favors the bold. Right, but sometimes bold moves backfire spectacularly. Yes, they do. Didn't something happen just before the expedition was set to sail? Oh, yes. One of those events that make you wonder if the gods themselves were intervening? Okay. A bunch of religious statues called Hermae were vandalized all over Athens. Now, for those of us, or for our listeners, I should say, who aren't familiar with these Hermae, can you explain what they were? Sure, yeah. Imagine these pillars, okay, with the head of Hermes, the messenger god, okay, and they were everywhere in the city. Street corners, doorways, right, almost like protective spirits. To deface them was like a serious offense. Yeah, it's like attacking something sacred, right? Like really shaking the very foundation of their society. Exactly. At that, people were terrified. Oh, it created mass panic. People saw this as a bad omen. Right, a sign that the gods were angry, especially with this big expedition about to leave. Right. And of course, suspicion fell on Alcibiades. Of course, I mean, he was already controversial. Yeah, known for pushing boundaries, challenging tradition. He was an easy target. He was. And even though there was no real evidence, linking him to this vandalism, he was summoned back to Athens to stand trial. Now knowing his personality, right, I bet he didn't take that lying down. He did not. Instead of going back to face trial, Alcibiades did something even more shocking. What did he do? He defected. No way, to Sparta. Are you serious? So he went from being like the champion of this huge Athenian military endeavor, right, to betraying them and siding with their biggest enemy. Yes, that is incredible. It was a huge blow to Athenian morale. Yeah, strategically, it was a gift to the Spartans. Right, because he knew everything. Oh yeah, he knew all their plans, their weaknesses. He was able to give the Spartans inside information. Yeah, that could really cripple this expedition. Wow. Talk about a high-stakes game of betrayal and espionage. Yeah. It really highlights how individual choices, even those that are just driven by personal ambition, can have huge ripple effects. Yeah, on the course of a war. Absolutely. But also kind of makes you question the nature of leadership. Yeah, was he a visionary strategist who just became disillusioned? Or was he just an opportunist? Yeah, an opportunist who was willing to betray his city for his own personal gain. Yeah, those are questions that historians are still debating. They are, yes. But I think, regardless of his motivation, there's no doubt that his defection was a turning point in the war. Oh, absolutely. Shifted the balance of power. Yeah. Injected this element of chaos and unpredictability. Right. And I think it really set the stage for one of the most dramatic and consequential chapters, in this whole war. The Athenian defeat at Syracuse. Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. All right, tell me, what happened in Sicily? Okay, so the Athenian expedition, even without Alcibiades, they did have some initial success. Yeah, they captured a few cities, they won some battles, but they made some crucial mistakes. What kind of blunders could lead to such a massive defeat? Well, they completely underestimated the strength and resolve of Syracuse, the most powerful city in Sicily. Right. The Syracusans, with help from Sparta, of course, they put up a much fiercer resistance than the Athenians expected. The war dragged on. Athenian supply lines got stretched thin. Disease started to spread through their ranks. Morale plummeted. So it sounds like history was repeating itself. It does, doesn't it? But this time on foreign soil, right? So what do? Well, sadly, they didn't cut their losses and retreat. Oh. They doubled down. They sent even more troops and resources. In this desperate attempt to kind of salvage the campaign. Yeah, that's that classic military blunder. Yes, it had escalating commitment to a losing cause. Yeah, and for Athens, it proved disastrous. So what was the final outcome of this Sicilian expedition? It was a complete and utter rout. Wow. The Athenian fleet was trapped in the harbor at Syracuse. Their ships were destroyed, their soldiers were killed or captured, thousands of Athenian lives lost, their resources depleted, their image of invincibility was shattered. This had to be a turning point in the whole war. And I mean, what were the repercussions of this defeat? Oh, it was a catastrophe for Athens, both militarily and psychologically. It crippled their ability to wage war, right? And it really gave Sparta the upper hand. But maybe even more importantly, it eroded Athenian confidence. Yeah. It really undermined their image as the dominant power in Greece. And I think this is where we see the real strategic impact of Alcibiades' defection. Right, he didn't just give the Spartans tactical information, he helped orchestrate a defeat. Right, that shook Athens to its core. Exactly. And with Athens reeling from this loss, Sparta, emboldened by their success, they were ready to seize the initiative. Right, they knew this was their chance to finally break Athenian power. So this sets the stage for the final act of the Peloponnesian War. It does, and I have a feeling it's going to be a dramatic one. Oh yes, but we'll have to wait for the next part of our deep dive to see how it all unfolds, so stay tuned. Okay, so last time we left off with Athens really reeling. I mean, that defeat in Sicily was devastating. Well, yeah, I really gave Sparta the upper hand in the war, so what did they do to capitalize on that? Well, they saw it as their opportunity to strike while the iron was hot. You know, Athens was vulnerable, right? So they came up with this kind of multi-pronged strategy. You okay? First, they started supporting rebellions. Okay. In Athenian allied cities. Okay. So encouraging them to break away. Exactly. Encourage them to break away from Athenian control. That's smart. Not only does it weaken Athens directly, right, but it also really undermines their image of power. Exactly. It's classic. Using both military and political tactics to really wear down an enemy. Yeah. But they didn't stop there. Okay. They also made a crucial alliance with the Persians. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the Persians and the Greeks, right? They'd been enemies for centuries. Yeah, so what motivated them to side with Sparta? Well, remember, Persia had a vested interest in seeing Greece weakened. Oh, a strong, united Greece was a threat to their empire. Right. So they saw an opportunity here to kind of exploit this conflict to their advantage. And they ended up providing Sparta with a lot of financial backing. Okay, so that allowed them to build a new fleet? Exactly, a fleet that could challenge Athenian naval dominance. So the Persians are bankrolling their efforts. Yeah. Now Sparta has the resources to confront Athens at sea. How did Athens respond to this? Well, they still had a pretty formidable navy. They were really struggling to rebuild after Sicily. Yeah. They were also dealing with political turmoil at home. Right. And economic hardship. So it sounded like they were really on the ropes. Yeah, pretty much facing enemies abroad. Right. And at home. Yeah, and all of this contributed to their eventual downfall. In 405 BCE, the Spartan fleet, commanded by this brilliant admiral Lysander, they scored a decisive victory at the Battle of Aegospotamos. Now, for military history buffs, right, this battle is fascinating. What were some of the key things that led to that Spartan victory? Well, Lysander was a master of deception and surprise. He lured the Athenian fleet into a vulnerable position, pretended to retreat, and then when the Athenians least expected it, he launched this swift and overwhelming attack. Wow, so the Athenian fleet was caught completely off guard. They were. And they were completely destroyed. This was the final nail on the coffin landed for Athens. It was. Without a navy, Athens was helpless. They couldn't defend themselves, they couldn't get food. They're at the mercy of the Spartans. And so in 404, after a long and brutal siege, Athens surrendered. And that brought an end to the Peloponnesian War. So after 27 years, Sparta emerges victorious. Right. But what was the real cost of that victory? And what was the legacy of this conflict? Well, it had a profound impact on ancient Greece. It marked the end of the Athenian Golden Age, that period of incredible cultural and intellectual flourishing. Right. Spartan victory ushered in a new era of Spartan dominance. But it was short-lived and marked by a lot of instability. The war had exhausted everyone, all the Greek city-states, and it left them vulnerable to new threats. It's like they're saying, a Pyrrhic victory, you win. Right. But it's such a great cost, right, that it's almost indistinguishable from defeat. Exactly. And within just a few decades, the Greek city-states would fall under the control of Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father. So, you see the Peloponnesian War, it ended Athenian supremacy, but it also paved the way for the rise of a new power that would eventually conquer all of Greece. So even in victory, Sparta couldn't escape the shadow of this war. It really is a reminder that the consequences of conflict, they can be far-reaching. And often unpredictable. Absolutely. But even though it was an Athenian defeat, their legacy lived on. Their contributions to philosophy, art, literature, democracy, all of that continued to influence Western civilization. And of course we have Thucydides' account, which is still studied today, by military strategists, historians. It's a work that continues to resonate. It gives us this window into the complexities of ancient warfare. The challenges of leadership, and the human struggle for power. And I think what we've seen in this deep dive is that these lessons from the Peloponnesian War, they're as relevant now, as they were 2,500 years ago. Absolutely. And if there's one key takeaway thing for anyone interested in military history, it's this. Even the most powerful empires, they are not invincible. Where strategic blunders, internal divisions, the unpredictable nature of war itself can bring down even the mightiest nations. It's a cautionary tale. That reminds us to study the past, not just for the history, but for the insights that it offers into the human condition, the dynamics of power, the challenges of conflict and peace. And it reminds us to never underestimate the impact of individual choices. From Pericles' plague-stricken strategy to Alcibiades' fateful betrayal, the Peloponnesian War shows us that these decisions made by leaders, sometimes even ordinary individuals, can have a ripple effect that shapes the course of history. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Peloponnesian War. Thanks for having me. We hope you found it informative, insightful, and maybe even a bit not provoking. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.